Hey guys, Big here. So the purpose of today's video is to give you a high-level overview of Titan Canyon, how it works, how the point system works, what are all the different things that we can and should be doing during Titan Canyon, as well as to cover two specific fill strategies for how we're going to fill buildings in a very specific way. So to start off, high-level overview is the first 5 minutes of Titan Canyon. We're going to be not fighting. We're just going to be looking around the map. We need to be checking the opposing three corners to see where our opponent's at strength-wise. We try to make a informed decision based off their CP, which isn't always the most accurate, but we can see which corners are stronger or weaker and who we're going to target. So that's what we should be doing in the first 5 minutes. The next thing that I want to cover is how the point system works in Titan Canyon, because how the point system works should dictate what are the buildings that we're going after and when, right? So the first thing is the tech trial site. Now this is one of the more important buildings, especially when Titan Canyon first opens up. These are the inner corners right here. As you can see, they look a little bit different. These tech trial sites are worth 100 points a minute. So if you can hold one of those, that's 100 points a minute. Now each of these tech trial sites right here in each of the corners, these are worth 50 points a minute each. Now, of course, alone, they're not as important as the tech trial site, but two of them are worth as much as a tech trial site. So when you're in the middle of a battle, if a tech trial site is being heavily guarded by the strongest person on the team, the one person that we can't beat, it may be more worth it to go after two tech trial sites rather than one discarded repository. So that's an example of why knowing how the points works. Now, the next two buildings that we're going to talk about are Nexus hubs, which are the top and bottom, and then teleport gateways, which are on the left and right. So Nexus hubs, what they do is they cut down the occupation time that you need to accumulate points by 35%. So you can accumulate points in buildings 35% faster. Now, what does that mean? That means if you've got this repository right here, which is 100 points a minute, having a Nexus hub will let you accumulate 100 points in 35% less time. Now, again, why is that important? Because this Nexus hub by itself doesn't do anything. I see this all the time in Titan Canyon. People will fight over this Nexus hub, but in the meantime, they don't have any corners, they don't have any buildings, and they're holding a Nexus hub for no reason because they can't accumulate points that way. Now, the teleport gateway, what it does is it reduces the cooldown time between accumulating ports by 35%, which means you can accumulate ports 35% faster. Now, the other building is this hover station. Now, we should always be trying to send marches to the hover station. I can't give you like an exact breakdown on points because it depends on how you place. But it does matter, and it can make the difference between first place, second place, third place, second place, things like that. It can bump you up significantly in points, enough to make a difference. And then outside of that, there are crystal mines, which people should be farming, as well as gems, bounty points. Those are all the ways that you can accumulate points in Titan Canyon. Now, the other thing to take into consideration is that there are skills that you can accumulate in Titan Canyon. So the way that you accumulate skills is by having your march inside of a building. Now, if you have 5 marches in one building, you're not going to accumulate points any faster. You're still going to accumulate points as fast as if you had 1 march in one building. However, if you have a march in 4 buildings, you will accumulate points towards your skill points faster. So that's important to keep in mind, that you should be trying to keep a march in a building that is well protected, that you're unlikely to get kicked out of, that maybe a big is in, because that way you can accumulate some skills. You can accumulate potions and speed ups and things like that. So it's important to keep in mind. Now, the things that people can do, right? The things that anybody can do. If they're an anybody can build towers. Even if you try to port into a repository and you can't, you keep getting ported out, that's fine. Even if you're sitting inside of this safe area right here, you can still send your towers down and have them build while while corners are not being specifically attacked, right? Now, you want to try to do this on the corners that we own, on the corners that we control, because especially the weakening towers can have a huge effect on our ability to remain competitive. The next thing that absolutely anybody can do, CE or is to farm crystal mines. Those are really important because they make a very significant portion of the points. I've been in Titan Canyon matches before where my team is more dominant strength-wise, but we're not farming as well, and we end up losing to people who are farming very well. So farming crystal mines is extremely important. The other thing that that you can do is you don't have to be sitting in this corner here to farm crystal mines, right? Let's say, for example, even a big, if he's got 1 or 2 marches that he's using, he could maybe put 1 march in, in a building that's not seeing a lot of activity, so that he can accumulate some skill points. And then he even the bigs can send a march or 2 off to crystal mines. Especially if you are sitting in this corner, you can send marches off to crystal mines, and you should be farming as much as you can, because that's the biggest impact that you can have on the points, right? The other thing that people should be doing, and anybody can do, is send marches to this hover station in the middle once it opens up. And lastly, especially people who are sitting in this corner who've been ported out and are not strong enough to be super competitive, what they're going to be doing is, you're going to be sitting in this corner, you're going to send some marches off to crystal mines. Try to keep 1 or 2 marches available, or recall, right? Because what's going to happen is, if you're trying to port in here and be competitive on a tech trial site, and you keep getting ported out, you end up here, you're going to end up sitting here for a significant amount of time, to where you can start to accumulate ports. Now, rather than letting those ports just sit and waste away, the thing that you can do is you can start scanning the map for buildings that aren't seeing a lot of activity. Now, let's say there's a tech trial site here and there's nobody there. It's owned by someone else, right? Owned by an opponent, but there's nobody there right then. What you can do is you can port in and you can collect all of the gems that are around it, right? So use your ports for that. Use your ports to go into places that are not being actively fought for, and collect any of the gems that are there. Now, you should collect the gems first before trying to take any of those buildings, because as soon as you flip that building, it's going to tip them off that there's something going on in that corner. Otherwise, they're going to have to be watching that specific building to know that you're there. So that's one thing that any player can do with accumulated ports, right? Now that we've covered, the point system, what are the things that everybody can be doing and should be doing, let's cover our specific fill strategies. So we've got 2 strategies, right? One is this strategy with no bases, right? So this is what I was referring to earlier when I was saying that any can send their towers off, even to corners that are maybe not actively seeing activity, but there is activity from time to time. What you can do is you can start building these weakening towers and strengthening towers in those corners before we even go and flip them, and that way it makes us a little bit more competitive in our ability to hold them. We can also build these specifically in our corners, right, on our tech trial sites. What we're gonna try to do on our repositories is a little bit different, but on the tech trial sites, if you're just sitting in our corner and you've got some marches off to the mines, and you feel like you keep popping in and you keep getting ported away, you can start to put up these towers. Now, I ideally we should be setting them up in this specific formation: one tile in off the corner for weakening towers, and then one tile in off the center for strengthening towers. And the reason is because what this does is it doesn't allow anybody to come in unless they've shrunk their base to a small base. And by doing that, they lose their buffs. If one of our bigs has a march inside, it makes it significantly easier for them to defend this repository because they've got a full march in and our opponent is coming in with a small base, so they're missing buffs, they're losing buffs. But B, we've also got these weakening towers, which will give us an advantage, right? So this is one fill strategy that we can use, and this doesn't require anybody to be sitting inside of the building. And again, like, this strategy is what we can and should be using on our tech trial sites, which again, the tech trial sites are these outer buildings, right? So tech trial sites are these guys right here, right? The inner corner is the repository. Tech trial sites are around the outside. So that's the fill strat that we should be using for our tech trial sites if we have enough MMs to do it. We want to prioritize the repository, but if we have enough MMs, we should be trying to fill the tech trial sites in this way around in our corner, right? Now this is going to require 2 MMs for the weakening towers, and it's going to require an additional 2 MMs for those 2 extra strength towers. So you're going to need to have 2 MMs send both strength and weakening towers, and then 2 MMs send only strength towers, right? Now, the other strategy that we're going to be using specifically for repositories and possibly Nexus hubs, depending on the situation, is this one right here. Now, what this one requires is it requires 2 MMs and it requires 2 CEs. Now, what we want to do is we want to get them again in these specific locations because, as you can see, there's no 2x2 gap that anybody can port in. So again, people are required to shrink their bases in order to get in. Now, these are going to be on tech repositories and possibly Nexus hubs because they're going to see a lot more activity, right? We're much more likely to get hit here. Now, the idea behind this is that our CEs will be equidistant to every building and every base that's here, right? So they should be able to reinforce it. Let's say this MM is being attacked. They should be able to reinforce this MM. Now, the idea behind this is that people are not gonna want to shrink their bases because they lose some buffs, and if they want to maintain those buffs, they're gonna have to attack from a distance. With this setup, nobody's gonna be attacking from a distance because immediately our CEs can reinforce the MM, they can reinforce the weakening tower, they can reinforce the strength tower. We have time, our CEs have time to reinforce absolutely everything, including each other, if need be, right? Now, this strategy is tough to pull off when our opponent has a player that's strong enough to also port in with a small base and still burn our CEs, right? This is really difficult to pull off, but what you want to do when that happens, when you have, let's say you have a big port in here, what you want to do is, all of our people should be watching, and we want to make sure that we're not giving them an opportunity to make their base bigger. So let's say if this CE gets ported out, we want to port someone in as quickly as possible if it's a close enough fight, right? The other thing that our CEs would want to do is they'd want to keep their marches in base, right? You don't want to try to burn burn those really big players, because you're going to end up losing your main HT and all that. And what can happen is if it just costs him too many troops to burn our CEs, he may end up leaving. Even if he's winning March for March, he may end up leaving. Now, the other thing that we want to have with this fill strategy is we don't want to dedicate only 2 MMs and only CEs to a corner. We want to have a pool of MMs and CEs. And the reason is because what's going to end up happening is, as these players are sitting here, they're going to accumulate ports. And if they're just sitting there, those ports are wasted. So we want to have, let's say, like, especially the CEs, we want to have a strong CE, at least one really strong CE sitting in this corner until we can get it up, fortified, get it situated. Now, as that CE starts to accumulate ports, I'd say, 3-4 ports, something like that, we should be calling that out, and this, we should be saying, like, hey, this CE should be saying, hey, I've got ports, I'm ready to move around some, right? And then another CE who's been out on the map and who's been porting around, fighting, trying to take other corners, Nexus hubs, whatever, that player can come back in. And those players should also be saying, hey, I've only got one port left. Do you need me in the corner, right? We should be on VC for this whole thing, but being able to communicate this way is going to make us much more effective in terms of being able to take advantage of our ports, take and hold our corners, and fortify them, as well as Nexus hubs. Now, the strategy of where are we going to use this? Are we going to use it on our repository versus 2 repositories versus 1 repository and a Nexus hub or a teleport gateway? Like, those are things that we're going to have to decide in the match, based on who it is that we're up against, based on what is it that's happening on the map. And we're going to have shot callers in VC who are going to dictate those things and are going to say, hey, let's go for another tech repository, or, let's try to build on the Nexus hub, right? Those things should be called by our shot callers in VC. If you guys have any questions, concerns, please let me know.